I was standing in my garage in Boise, Idaho, staring at the empty space where $2,000 worth of premium cedar lumber had been stacked just 3 days ago, and my blood was beginning to boil. The wood had been sitting there for exactly 1 week, carefully organized and covered with a tarp, waiting for me to finish the deck I was building in my backyard. I had taken my time selecting each board at Morrison Lumber, inspecting them for knots and warping, making sure I got exactly what I needed for the project. Now there was nothing but some scattered sawdust and a few wood shavings on the concrete floor. My name is Marcus Reed, and I had lived in the Sunset Ridge community for about 8 months. The neighborhood was one of those newer developments on the east side of Boise, where every house looked vaguely similar, and the HOA rules were supposedly in place to maintain property values. I had read through the covenant documents before buying the place, and while some rules seemed excessive, nothing had prepared me for what was about to unfold. I walked out of the garage and looked around the street, trying to figure out what could have happened. My first thought was theft, but who steals lumber? It was heavy, bulky, and not exactly something you could slip into a backpack. Someone would have needed a truck and multiple trips or several people working together. As I stood there trying to make sense of it, I noticed something strange at the end of the street. There was new fencing going up around the community playground area, about 4 houses down from mine. The wood looked fresh, unstained, and from where I stood it had a distinctly familiar reddish tone. Cedar, premium cedar to be specific. The exact same type I had purchased. I started walking toward the playground, my suspicion growing with each step. As I got closer, I could see workers installing the fence panels, and my stomach dropped. That was definitely cedar, and not just any cedar. The boards had the same distinctive grain pattern, the same dimensions, and even the same slight reddish undertone that had made me choose this particular batch in the first place. One of the boards even had a small knot near the end that I specifically remembered because I had planned to cut that section off for a shorter piece. A white SUV was parked near the construction site, and I recognized it immediately. It belonged to Patricia Hendricks, the HOA president and the most notorious busybody in Sunset Ridge. She was standing there with a clipboard, directing the workers and pointing at different sections of the fence. Patricia was in her early 50s, with that distinctive haircut that somehow looked both expensive and dated at the same time. She wore a pearl necklace, even though she was just supervising fence construction, and her voice carried across the playground with the authority of someone who genuinely believed she was more important than she actually was. I approached the work site, trying to keep my composure. "Patricia," I called out. She turned and gave me that smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Marcus, good morning. Isn't this fence turning out wonderfully? We have been needing to upgrade the playground perimeter for months now." "Where did you get the wood?" I asked directly. Her smile faltered slightly. "The HOA purchased materials for this project. It was approved at the last board meeting. Why do you ask?" "Because that looks exactly like the lumber that was sitting in my garage, the lumber that disappeared sometime in the last 3 days. Patricia's expression shifted to one of theatrical confusion. "Oh, Marcus, I am sure you are mistaken. This wood was properly sourced for the community project." "Then you would not mind showing me the receipts for the lumber purchase," I said, crossing my arms. She clutched her clipboard a bit tighter. "The HOA's financial records are available for review at the monthly meetings as outlined in the bylaws. You are welcome to submit a request in writing." "I am not waiting a month, Patricia. That is my wood, and I want to know how it ended up here." One of the workers, a younger guy in a faded blue t-shirt, had stopped his work and was watching our exchange with interest. Patricia noticed and waved him off dismissively. "Continue with your work, please. We are on a schedule." She turned back to me, her voice dropping to that condescending tone that made my jaw clench. "Marcus, I understand you are new to the community, so perhaps you do not fully understand how things work here. The HOA has authority to manage common areas and make improvements as needed. If you had materials stored improperly or in violation of community standards, they would have been subject to removal. Stored improperly. They were in my garage. Open garages are considered visible from the street and fall under aesthetic guidelines. Section 12, paragraph 4 of the covenants clearly states that building materials cannot be stored in a manner visible from common areas for more than 48 hours. I stared at her in disbelief. My garage door was closed. And even if it was open, that does not give you the right to take my property. Patricia straightened her posture, looking down her nose at me despite being several inches shorter. If materials were removed, it would have been because they were in violation. The HOA has the authority to remedy violations and bill homeowners for the correction. You should check your mailbox. I believe a notice was sent. I could not believe what I was hearing. She was actually admitting to taking my lumber and acting like she had the legal right to do it. You stole my property, Patricia. That is theft. Her face flushed red. How dare you accuse me of theft? Everything I do is for this community and in accordance with our governing documents. If you have a complaint, you can file it properly through the appropriate channels. I am calling the police, I said, pulling out my phone. Go ahead, Patricia said, her voice icy. They will tell you this is a civil matter. The HOA has legal authority granted through the covenants you signed when you purchased your home. I stepped away from her and dialed 911, then reconsidered and called the non-emergency line instead. A dispatcher answered, and I explained the situation as calmly as I could. She said she would send an officer to take a report, and I could feel Patricia's eyes boring into my back the entire time I was on the phone. When I hung up, Patricia was already on her own phone, presumably calling someone from the HOA board or maybe even a lawyer. I walked over to the fence and took several photos with my phone, making sure to capture the wood grain, the knot patterns, and anything else that might help prove these were my boards. The worker I had noticed earlier gave me a slight nod when Patricia was not looking. About 20 minutes later, a boys' police cruiser pulled up. The officer who stepped out was in his 30s with a name tag that read Officer Morrison. He listened as I explained the situation, then asked Patricia for her side of the story. She gave him the same explanation about HOA authority and covenant violations, speaking in that saccharine tone that people use when they think they are untouchable. Officer Morrison looked at the fence, then at me, then back at Patricia. Ma'am, did you take lumber from Mr. Reed's property? The HOA exercised its authority to remove materials that were in violation of community standards, Patricia said carefully. So you did take the lumber. We remedied a violation. Officer Morrison sighed. That is still taking someone's property without permission, Mr. Reed. Do you have any proof that this lumber belongs to you? I have receipts, I said. They are at my house. Every single board is documented. I can show you the exact dimensions, the grade, even the specific batch number from the lumber yard. Patricia's face went a shade paler, but she maintained her composure. The HOA also has documentation for our purchase. Then let us see both sets of documents, Officer Morrison said. I practically jogged back to my house, my heart pounding. I kept all my receipts for home improvement projects in a file folder in my office, organized by date. I found the Morrison lumber receipt from exactly 9 days ago, detailing the purchase of 43 cedar boards, 8x8 pressure-treated posts, and various hardware. The total had come to just over $2,000, and every item was listed with dimensions and grade specifications. When I returned to the playground, Patricia was still there, but she no longer had the same confident posture. Officer Morrison took my receipt and examined it carefully. This shows you purchased cedar lumber 9 days ago. Can you prove these specific boards are the ones from your receipt? The receipt has the batch number, I said, pointing to a series of numbers printed near the bottom. Cedar lumber gets batch stamped at the mill. If you look at the ends of these boards, you will see the stamp. The worker in the blue shirt spoke up. "He is right, officer. There are stamps on the ends. I saw them when we were cutting." Patricia shot the worker a venomous look. "You are here to work, not provide commentary." Officer Morrison walked over to the fence and examined one of the boards. Sure enough, there was a faint stamp on the end with a series of numbers. He compared it to my receipt, and his expression shifted. "These numbers match the batch on your receipt, Mr. Reed." "I am sure many batches have similar numbers," Patricia interjected quickly. "This proves nothing." "Ma'am, do you have a receipt for the lumber the HOA purchased?" Patricia hesitated. "I will need to retrieve it from the HOA files. It is not something I carry with me." "How about you do that?" "I will wait," Officer Morrison said. Patricia made a show of pulling out her phone and making several calls, each one apparently going to voicemail. "The treasurer is not answering. He handles all the financial documentation." "What is the treasurer's name?" "I can try reaching him directly," Officer Morrison offered. "That would not be appropriate without proper authorization," Patricia said stiffly. "HOA financial records are private." Officer Morrison's patience was clearly wearing thin. "Ma'am, if you took Mr. Reed's property, that is theft." "The HOA's rules do not override criminal law. Either you can provide proof that you purchased this lumber, or we have a serious problem." "I demand to speak to your supervisor," Patricia said, her voice rising. "This is harassment, and I will not tolerate being treated like a criminal when I am simply trying to improve our community. You are welcome to file a complaint, but right now, based on the evidence, it appears you took Mr. Reed's lumber without permission. That is theft." Patricia's face was bright red now. "This is absurd. The HOA has insurance and legal representation. You cannot possibly think that I personally stole anything. Any actions taken were authorized by the board and in accordance with our governing documents." "Then show me the authorization and the receipts for your lumber purchase," Officer Morrison repeated. Patricia clutched her phone tighter, and I could see her mind racing. "I need to consult with our legal counsel before providing any documentation." Officer Morrison nodded slowly. "Here is what is going to happen. Mr. Reed, you have documentation showing you purchased this lumber. The batch numbers match. Without evidence to the contrary, this appears to be your property. Ma'am, I strongly suggest you contact your HOA board and get this sorted out, because right now this looks like theft." "Are you arresting me?" Patricia asked, her voice shaking slightly. "Not at this moment, but Mr. Reed has the right to press charges." "I am going to file a report, and I would recommend you both seek legal counsel to resolve this." Patricia turned to me, her expression a mixture of anger and something that might have been fear. "You are making a huge mistake. The HOA will fight this, and you will be responsible for legal fees. Not to mention, there will be consequences for attacking board members with false accusations." "I am not attacking anyone," I said. "I just want my lumber back. It has been cut and installed. That is impossible now." Officer Morrison interjected, "Then the HOA will need to compensate Mr. Reed for the value of the lumber." "We will see what our lawyer says about that," Patricia snapped. She turned to the workers. "Stop construction immediately. Do not touch anything else until I give further instructions." She stormed off to her SUV and drove away, leaving the workers standing around looking confused. Officer Morrison took down all my information and said he would file a report. He advised me to document everything, keep copies of all communications, and consider consulting with an attorney. As he drove away, the worker in the blue shirt approached me. "Hey man, I just want you to know we did not know anything about this. The HOA hired our crew yesterday and said they had materials on site. We just showed up and started building. If we had known it was stolen, we never would have touched it." "I believe you," I said. "Did Patricia say anything about where the lumber came from?" He shook his head. "She just said it was stored in a garage and needed to be moved for the project. She gave us the code to some garage and told us to load everything up and bring it here. We thought it was weird, but she is the HOA president, so we figured it was legit. She gave you a garage code. That was my garage. Man, that is messed up." Look, I do not want any trouble, but if you need me to testify or whatever, I will tell the truth about what happened. I got his name and contact information, then headed back to my house. My mind was reeling. Patricia had not only taken my lumber, but she had gone into my garage to do it. That meant she had somehow gotten my garage code, which was a whole other level of violation. I had given the code to exactly two people: my girlfriend Sarah, who lived across town, and my neighbor Jim, who I had asked to keep an eye on the place when I traveled for work. I walked next door and knocked. Jim answered, a beer in hand despite it being barely noon. He was a friendly guy, retired from the tech industry, and we had hit it off pretty well since I moved in. Marcus, what is going on? I saw the cop car. I explained the situation, watching his face cycle through shock, anger, and disgust. When I got to the part about the garage code, he looked genuinely distressed. Man, I am so sorry. Patricia came by a few days ago and said she needed to access your garage for some kind of HOA inspection. She said she had already called you and you approved it. She seemed official and had all this paperwork, so I gave her the code. I thought you knew about it. Jim, she stole $2,000 worth of lumber from me. His face went pale. Oh my God, I had no idea. Marcus, I am so sorry. I would never have given it to her if I had known. She seemed so official, and she kept talking about HOA regulations and safety inspections. It is not your fault. She manipulated you. Is there anything I can do? I will testify. I will write a statement, whatever you need. A written statement would be great. Just detail exactly what she said and when she came by. Jim immediately sat down at his kitchen table and started writing, his hand shaking slightly. I felt bad for him. He was a genuinely good guy who had been conned by Patricia's act. While he wrote, I called Sarah and explained what had happened. She was furious and offered to come over immediately, but I told her I would keep her posted. I needed to figure out my next steps. Jim finished his statement and handed it to me. It was detailed and damning, describing how Patricia had presented herself as acting on official HOA business and explicitly stated that I had given permission for the garage access. That was fraud on top of theft. I spent the rest of the afternoon documenting everything. I took more photos, wrote down a timeline of events, and started researching Idaho property law and HOA regulations. What I found was both encouraging and infuriating. While HOAs did have certain powers granted by covenants, they absolutely did not have the right to enter private garages without permission or take personal property. Patricia had committed multiple crimes: theft, fraud, and possibly trespassing, depending on how the law interpreted garage access. That evening, I received an email from Patricia. It was sent from her official HOA president email address and was clearly written to sound as formal and threatening as possible. It claimed that I had violated multiple covenant provisions by storing building materials, that the HOA had exercised its right to remedy violations, and that I would be billed for the cost of the remediation plus administrative fees. The email also stated that my accusation of theft was defamatory and that I should cease making such claims immediately or face legal action. I forwarded the email to Officer Morrison and then sat down to draft my response. I kept it short and factual, stating that I had not given permission for anyone to enter my garage or take my property, that I had documented evidence of the theft, and that I expected full reimbursement for the value of the lumber plus additional damages. I also informed her that I had filed a police report and would be pursuing all available legal remedies. After I sent the email, I called a lawyer. I had gotten a referral from a friend who had dealt with HOA issues before, and the attorney, David Chen, agreed to see me the next morning. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the confrontation with Patricia in my head, thinking about all the things I should have said or done differently. The next morning, I arrived at David Chen's office in downtown Boise at 9 sharp. He was younger than I expected, maybe in his early 40s, with an easy manner that immediately put me at ease. I laid out everything that had happened, providing copies of the receipt, the police report, Jim's statement, and all my documentation. David listened carefully, taking notes, and when I finished, he leaned back in his chair with a slight smile. This is one of the most clear-cut cases I have seen in a while. Patricia Hendricks essentially confessed to theft in front of a police officer. So I have a case. You have an excellent case. The HOA does not have the right to take your personal property, period. Even if you had violated some obscure covenant provision, which I doubt, their remedy would be to fine you or seek a court order, not to physically take your belongings. The fact that she fraudulently obtained access to your garage makes it even worse. What should I do? First, I am going to send the HOA a demand letter. We will give them 10 days to reimburse you for the full value of the lumber, plus damages for the time and stress this has caused. If they do not comply, we will file a lawsuit. I also think you should follow up with the police to ensure they are investigating this as a criminal matter. Patricia said she has HOA insurance and lawyers. David nodded. She probably does, and frankly, that works in your favor. When the insurance company reviews this case, they are going to realize Patricia exposed them to significant liability. They will likely push for a settlement to avoid a trial. What about the criminal charges? That is up to the district attorney's office, but with the evidence you have, I think there is a strong case for theft. The value of the lumber puts it in the range of a felony in Idaho. That last part hit me hard. I had been angry and wanted justice, but hearing that Patricia could face felony charges made it real in a different way. Still, she had stolen from me, and she needed to face consequences. David drafted the demand letter that afternoon, and I approved it. He sent it via certified mail and email to both Patricia and the HOA board. The letter laid out the facts in precise legal language and demanded payment of $3,000, $2,000 for the lumber, and $1,000 in damages. It also demanded a written apology and stated that failure to comply would result in both civil and criminal legal action. The response came faster than I expected. 2 days later, I received a call from David. The HOA's lawyer contacted me. They want to meet to discuss settlement. Already. I told you, they know they do not have a leg to stand on. Their lawyer is actually reasonable. He reviewed the case and basically told his clients they screwed up badly. We scheduled a meeting for the following week at David's office. In the meantime, I followed up with Officer Morrison about the criminal investigation. He told me that the case had been forwarded to the detective division and that someone would be in touch. True to his word, 2 days later, I got a call from Detective Sarah Yates. Detective Yates was all business. She asked me to come to the station and give a formal statement, which I did. She reviewed all my documentation and seemed particularly interested in Jim's statement about Patricia fraudulently obtaining the garage code. She also asked about any other interactions I had had with the HOA or Patricia specifically. I mentioned that Patricia had sent me several violation notices since I moved in, most of them for minor things like my trash cans being visible from the street or my grass being a 1/4 inch too long. Detective Yates noted all of it and said she would be conducting a full investigation. She also mentioned that she would be interviewing the construction workers and other HOA board members. The settlement meeting arrived, and I walked into David's conference room to find Patricia, 2 other HOA board members I vaguely recognized, and a lawyer in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Robert Garrison. Patricia looked like she had aged 5 years in the past week. The confident, condescending demeanor was gone, replaced by a tight-lipped anxiety. Robert started the meeting by acknowledging that there had been a misunderstanding and that the HOA was prepared to offer a settlement to resolve the matter amicably. David immediately pushed back on the word misunderstanding. "Let us be clear," David said. "This was not a misunderstanding. Your client committed theft and fraud. She illegally entered Mr. Reed's garage and stole his property. The only question is how much this is going to cost her and the HOA." Robert shifted uncomfortably. We are prepared to offer full reimbursement for the lumber, plus an additional $1,000 for Mr. Reed's inconvenience. That is the same amount we demanded in our letter, David said. But given the ongoing criminal investigation and the additional time my client has had to spend on this matter, we are now seeking $5,000 in total, plus a guarantee that Miss Hendricks will resign from the HOA board. Patricia's head snapped up. I will not resign. I have given years of service to this community. Robert put a hand on her arm to quiet her. That is not something we can agree to. Patricia's position on the board is elected by the homeowners. Then we will see you in court, David said simply. And when the criminal charges are filed, I imagine the homeowners will have their own opinions about Patricia's continued service. The room fell silent. One of the other board members, a man in his 60s named Tom, spoke up. What criminal charges, Miss Hendricks committed theft, fraud, and trespassing. The police are investigating, and based on the value of the stolen property, she is looking at felony charges. Tom turned to Patricia, his expression shocked. You told us this was a simple covenant enforcement action. You said the homeowner had given permission. I acted in accordance with HOA authority, Patricia said defensively. You stole from him. Tom's voice rose. You cannot do that, Patricia. That is not how any of this works. The third board member, a woman named Linda, nodded in agreement. If we had known what you actually did, we never would have supported this. This is insane. Robert tried to regain control of the meeting. Let us all take a breath. I think we can reach an agreement here. What if we agree to the $5,000 and Patricia agrees to take a temporary leave of absence from the board while this is sorted out? David looked at me and I shook my head. No, she resigns or we go to court. Patricia stood up abruptly. This is a witch hunt. I have done nothing but try to maintain property values and uphold the standards of this community. You all should be thanking me, not treating me like a criminal. You are a criminal, I said quietly. You stole from me. Her face flushed red, and for a moment I thought she might actually explode. Robert stood and guided her back to her seat, whispering urgently in her ear. After a tense moment, he turned to us. Can we take a short break to confer with our clients? David agreed, and they left the conference room. David and I sat there in silence for a moment before he spoke. You are doing great. Do not back down. They are in a terrible position and they know it. When they returned 15 minutes later, Patricia looked defeated. Robert spoke for her. Miss Hendricks has agreed to resign from the HOA board effective immediately. The HOA will pay $5,000 to settle all civil claims. In exchange, Mr. Reed agrees not to pursue any additional civil action against the HOA or Miss Hendricks personally. That only covers the civil side, David said. The criminal investigation is separate and Mr. Reed has no control over that. We understand. Patricia will have to deal with that separately. David looked at me and I nodded. It was not everything I wanted, but it was fair. We spent the next hour working through the settlement agreement language, making sure every detail was clear. Patricia signed the resignation letter with a shaking hand, and the HOA cut me a check right there. As we were leaving, Tom pulled me aside. I am really sorry about all this. We had no idea Patricia was doing this kind of thing. The board is going to be implementing new oversight procedures to make sure nothing like this happens again. I appreciate that, I said. I just want to be able to live in my house without worrying about the HOA stealing from me. That is completely fair. Again, I am really sorry. I left the meeting feeling vindicated but exhausted. The whole ordeal had taken weeks of my life and caused incredible stress. I deposited the check, and Sarah took me out to celebrate that evening. Over dinner, I told her the whole story from beginning to end, and she just kept shaking her head in disbelief. I cannot believe she thought she could get away with that, Sarah said. Did she really think you would not notice your lumber was gone? I think she thought the HOA rules gave her unlimited authority. She was so used to pushing people around with threats and citation letters that she forgot there are actual laws. What do you think will happen with the criminal case? I do not know. That is up to the DA now. The criminal case moved forward over the next few months. Detective Yates conducted a thorough investigation, interviewing the workers, Jim, and even other homeowners who had had run-ins with Patricia. It turned out I was not the only one she had targeted. Several other residents reported similar harassment and aggressive enforcement of minor violations, though no one else had had property stolen. The district attorney's office eventually filed charges, 1 count of felony theft and 1 count of fraud. Patricia hired a criminal defense attorney and tried to fight the charges, but the evidence was overwhelming. My receipts, the batch numbers, Jim's statement, and the workers' testimony all painted a clear picture of what had happened. The case went to trial 8 months after the initial theft. I testified, as did Jim, Officer Morrison, and the construction worker who had been willing to speak up. Patricia's defense was essentially that she had believed she was acting within her authority as HOA president and had not intended to steal anything. The jury did not buy it. They found her guilty on both counts after deliberating for less than 3 hours. The judge sentenced her to probation, community service, and restitution, though the restitution was already covered by the civil settlement. She also had to pay court costs and legal fees, which I heard bankrupted her. She and her husband ended up selling their house in Sunset Ridge and moving away quietly a few months after the sentencing. As for me, I finally finished building my deck. I had to purchase new lumber, but the settlement money more than covered it. The new HOA board, led by Tom, was much more reasonable and focused on actual community improvement rather than petty enforcement. They even apologized publicly at a community meeting for what had happened and implemented new rules requiring board approval for any enforcement actions. I became something of a local legend in the neighborhood. People would stop me on walks and ask about the whole ordeal, and I always told them the same thing. Document everything, know your rights, and do not let anyone bully you, HOA or otherwise. The experience taught me a lot about standing up for myself and the importance of keeping detailed records. Those receipts saved me. Without them, it would have been my word against Patricia's, and who knows how that would have turned out. But because I had documentation for every single board, there was no ambiguity, no room for Patricia to wiggle out of what she had done. Sarah and I got engaged about a year after the whole incident. During the wedding planning, she joked that we should have the ceremony in my backyard on the deck that caused all the trouble. We ended up having it at a venue downtown instead, but we did take photos on the deck. Every time I look at those photos, I think about the whole crazy story and how a simple home improvement project turned into a legal battle. The deck itself turned out beautiful. The new cedar aged perfectly, developing that gorgeous silver-gray patina that makes the wood so desirable. I added a pergola the following summer and built custom benches along the railing. It became my favorite part of the house, a place where I could relax and feel proud of what I had built, both literally and figuratively. Jim and I remained good friends. He never quite forgave himself for giving Patricia the garage code, even though I told him repeatedly it was not his fault. He became hyper-vigilant about security after that, installing cameras and upgrading his locks. We still joke about it sometimes, in the way you can only joke about terrible things after enough time has passed. The Sunset Ridge community itself improved dramatically after Patricia's departure. The new board focused on actual amenities and community events rather than enforcement. They organized neighborhood barbecues, holiday parties, and even a community garden. It became the kind of place I had hoped it would be when I first bought the house. I learned that several other people had considered moving because of Patricia's aggressive tactics. One couple told me they had been house hunting before the whole lumber incident because they were so tired of the constant violation notices and harassment. After she left, they decided to stay, and they thanked me for standing up to her. That felt good in a way I had not expected. The story even made the local news. A reporter from the Idaho Statesman contacted me after hearing about the case through the court system. I gave an interview, and they ran a piece about HOA overreach and homeowner rights. It sparked a broader conversation about HOA governance in Idaho, and there was even talk of new state legislation to limit HOA powers. I do not know if anything ever came of that, but it was interesting to see my personal experience contribute to a larger discussion. Looking back on the whole experience, I realize how easily it could have gone differently. If I had not kept those receipts, if the batch numbers had not been stamped on the wood, if Jim had not been willing to write a statement, if the construction worker had not spoken up, if I had not pushed back against Patricia's initial intimidation tactics, things might have ended very differently. I might have been stuck paying for lumber I never got to use, and Patricia might have continued her reign of HOA terror unchecked. The legal system worked the way it was supposed to, which was both reassuring and somewhat surprising. I had heard so many stories about HOAs running roughshod over homeowners with impunity that I half expected to get stonewalled at every turn. Instead, the police took my complaint seriously, the prosecutor pursued charges, and the jury held Patricia accountable. It restored some of my faith in the system. David Chen, my attorney, and I stayed in touch after the case concluded. He occasionally sends me articles about HOA cases or calls to check in. He told me that my case became something of a teaching example in his practice, a clear illustration of why documentation matters, and why homeowners should not be afraid to assert their rights against overreaching HOAs. The $5,000 settlement, after legal fees and the cost of new lumber, left me with a modest profit. Sarah suggested we use it for a vacation, so we took a trip to Hawaii. Sitting on a beach in Maui watching the sunset, I thought about how strange life could be. A few months earlier, I had been standing in my empty garage, furious and confused. Now I was relaxed and happy, engaged to an amazing woman with a legal victory behind me and a future that looked bright. The criminal conviction followed Patricia for years. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had trouble finding a job because of the felony record. Part of me felt bad about that, but mostly I felt that justice had been served. She had made a choice to steal from me, and choices have consequences. If she had simply followed the law, acknowledged her mistake, and made it right, things could have been different. Instead, she doubled down, tried to intimidate me, and ended up losing everything. I sometimes wonder what motivated her. Was it a power trip? Did she genuinely believe the HOA gave her the right to do whatever she wanted? Was she trying to save the HOA money by stealing my lumber instead of purchasing their own? I will never know for sure, but my guess is it was a combination of all those things. She had been HOA president for so long that she had started to see herself as some kind of benevolent dictator, entitled to make unilateral decisions about other people's property. The irony is that if she had just asked me, I might have donated some lumber for the playground fence. I liked the idea of improving the community and I was not opposed to helping out, but she never asked. She just took, assuming that her position gave her that right. That assumption cost her everything. The playground fence that was built with my stolen lumber stood for about 2 years before the HOA replaced it. Tom told me they felt weird about having a fence built from stolen materials, even though I had been compensated. They tore it down and rebuilt it with properly purchased wood, and they invited me to a little ceremony when the new fence was completed. It was a nice gesture, and I appreciated the thought behind it. My own deck, the project that started this whole saga, has held up beautifully. I treated the wood properly, maintained it well, and it has become the centerpiece of my backyard. Sarah and I spend summer evenings out there, grilling dinner and talking about our days. Friends come over for gatherings and everyone always compliments the craftsmanship. I do not always tell them the story behind it, but when I do, their reactions are always some variation of shock and disbelief. The experience made me much more careful about HOA involvement in my life. I attend every board meeting now, not because I am looking for trouble, but because I want to stay informed about what is happening in the community. I read every email from the HOA carefully, and I document all interactions. I have not had any issues since Patricia left, but I am prepared if something comes up. I also became something of an informal advisor to other homeowners dealing with HOA problems. People in the neighborhood, and even from other developments, reach out to ask for advice. I always tell them the same things. Know your rights, document everything, do not be afraid to push back, and get a good lawyer if necessary. Several people have successfully resolved disputes using the same approach I took. One particularly satisfying moment came about 2 years after the trial. I was at a community event when a new resident approached me. She had just moved in and was getting orientation materials from the HOA. She told me that the welcome packet now included a document outlining homeowner rights and the limits of HOA authority. Tom had implemented it as part of the reforms after the Patricia debacle. The document explicitly stated that the HOA could not take personal property, could not enter homes or garages without permission, and outlined the proper procedures for addressing violations. Reading it felt like a small victory, a lasting change that came from my experience. The garage where my lumber had been stored eventually got a security upgrade. I installed cameras and a smart lock system that tracks every entry. It is probably overkill, but after having someone steal $2,000 worth of wood from what I thought was a secure space, I was not taking any chances. The cameras have never caught anything more exciting than neighborhood cats, but they give me peace of mind. Sarah moved in with me about 18 months after the lumber incident. We combined households, and she brought her own experiences and perspectives. She had lived in an apartment before, so the whole concept of HOA governance was new to her. When I told her the full story in detail, showing her all the documentation and legal papers, she was amazed. She could not believe something like that could happen in a supposedly upscale neighborhood with clear rules and regulations. We got married in the fall, 2 years after I first discovered my lumber was missing. The wedding was beautiful, intimate, and exactly what we wanted. During the reception, Jim gave a toast that referenced the whole incident, joking that he was glad I was better at choosing a wife than I was at choosing a neighborhood. Everyone laughed, and it felt good to find humor in something that had been so stressful. The Sunset Ridge community continued to evolve. Property values actually increased after Patricia left, which I found amusing given that she had always claimed her strict enforcement was necessary to maintain values. It turned out that people preferred living in a place where they were not constantly harassed about minor violations. Who knew? Tom served as HOA president for several years before passing the torch to Linda, the other board member who had been present at the settlement meeting. Both of them ran the HOA with common sense and fairness, focusing on genuine community needs rather than petty enforcement. Under their leadership, the neighborhood thrived. I never saw Patricia again after the trial. I heard she moved somewhere out of state, possibly Oregon or Washington. Part of me wondered if she ever reflected on what happened, if she ever acknowledged to herself that she had been in the wrong. Probably not. People like that rarely accept responsibility for their actions. They always find a way to blame others or rationalize their behavior. The construction worker who spoke up, the one in the blue shirt, turned out to be named Chris. I ran into him about a year after the trial at a hardware store. He recognized me and came over to say hello. He told me that his company had stopped taking jobs from HOAs after the experience, at least temporarily. The whole situation had left a bad taste in their mouths, and they did not want to risk being involved in something sketchy again. I appreciated his honesty and his willingness to testify, and I told him so. He shrugged it off, saying he had just told the truth, but it meant a lot to me. As time passed, the story became part of the neighborhood lore. New residents would hear about it from long-timers, and the details would sometimes get exaggerated. I heard one version where I had apparently confronted Patricia with a chainsaw, which definitely did not happen. But the core truth remained. The HOA had stolen from a resident, and that resident had fought back and won. The whole experience changed my perspective on community governance and the importance of checks and balances. HOAs can serve valuable purposes, managing common areas and coordinating community improvements. But without oversight and accountability, they can become vehicles for petty tyrants to exercise power over their neighbors. The reforms Tom implemented, particularly the new homeowner rights document and the requirement for board approval on enforcement actions, were crucial in preventing future abuses. I also gained a new appreciation for the legal system, despite its flaws. The process was slow and sometimes frustrating, but it worked. The police investigated, the prosecutor pursued charges, and a jury of regular people saw through Patricia's excuses and held her accountable. The civil settlement compensated me fairly, and the criminal conviction sent a message that this kind of behavior would not be tolerated. Friends sometimes ask me if I regret buying a house in an HOA community. The honest answer is complicated. I love my house, I love the neighborhood it has become, and I value the relationships I have built there. But I also recognize that I got lucky in some ways. If the police had not taken me seriously, if I had not kept those receipts, if David had not been such a good attorney, things could have turned out very differently. Would I buy in an HOA again? Maybe, but I would be much more careful about researching the board and understanding the governance structure first. The deck has become more than just a home improvement project. It is a symbol of standing up for yourself, of not backing down when you are in the right, of the importance of documentation and persistence. Every time I sit out there, I remember the whole crazy journey from discovering the theft to watching Patricia sign her resignation letter. It was exhausting and stressful, but ultimately worth it. Sarah and I started talking about starting a family, and the deck figured into those conversations. We imagined kids playing in the backyard, family barbecues on summer weekends, teaching our children to stand up for themselves and do the right thing even when it is hard. The house that had been the site of such conflict became the foundation for building a future. I kept all the documentation from the case in a file box in my office. Sometimes I would pull it out and look through it, marveling at how everything came together. The receipts with the batch numbers, Jim's handwritten statement, the police report, the demand letter, the settlement agreement, the news article. It was all there, a complete record of the entire ordeal. One piece of documentation I found particularly interesting was the HOA's initial response to David's demand letter. Before Robert Garrison got involved, the HOA had sent a defiant letter claiming they had acted within their authority and refusing to pay anything. It was only after Robert reviewed the actual facts that they changed course. That initial letter showed how delusional Patricia and the board had been about their legal position. The whole experience also taught me about the importance of community. Jim's willingness to write a statement, even though he felt terrible about his role in giving Patricia the garage code, was crucial. Chris, the construction worker, speaking up when he did not have to was crucial. Tom and Linda pushing back against Patricia at the settlement meeting was crucial. No one fights these battles alone, and having people willing to tell the truth and do the right thing makes all the difference. I occasionally checked Patricia's social media, more out of curiosity than anything else. She had moved to Portland and seemed to be working in retail. Her posts were carefully curated to present a perfect life, with no mention of the conviction or the circumstances that led to her leaving Idaho. I supposed everyone was entitled to move on and try to rebuild their lives, but I wondered if she had learned anything from the experience. The Idaho Statesman article about the case occasionally resurfaced online, particularly in forums discussing HOA issues. I would sometimes see it shared with comments like, This is why HOAs are terrible or good for this guy for fighting back. It was strange to see my experience become part of a broader conversation about property rights and community governance. David Chen reached out a few years after the case to ask if I would be willing to speak at a seminar for homeowners about HOA disputes. I agreed, and it was an interesting experience standing in front of a room full of people and telling my story. The questions afterward were thoughtful and engaged, and several people thanked me for sharing my experience. One woman told me she was dealing with something similar, and my story gave her the courage to push back against her HOA. That was probably the most meaningful outcome of the whole ordeal. Not the money, not the vindication, but the idea that my experience might help others stand up for their rights. If Patricia had gotten away with stealing from me, she might have done it to others. By fighting back, I not only protected myself, but potentially protected future victims. The criminal conviction was public record, of course, and it followed Patricia in ways that went beyond employment. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she had trouble volunteering for certain organizations because of the background check. She could not serve on boards or in positions of trust. The felony conviction had lasting consequences that extended far beyond the immediate penalties. I sometimes wondered if there was a better way the whole situation could have been handled. If I had approached Patricia differently, if she had been willing to acknowledge her mistake early on, could we have resolved it without police involvement and criminal charges? Maybe, but I doubted it. Her attitude from the very beginning was one of entitlement and refusal to accept responsibility. She did not think she had done anything wrong, and that fundamental disconnect made any resolution impossible without legal intervention. The batch number on the lumber, that seemingly insignificant stamp that most people would never notice, ended up being the key piece of evidence. It was specific enough to be undeniable but common enough in the industry that it did not seem suspicious. If Morrison Lumber had not stamped their wood, or if I had not kept the receipts with the batch information, the case would have been much harder to prove. Sometimes justice comes down to small details like that. Sarah and I eventually did start a family. Our daughter was born 3 years after the lumber incident, and our son followed 2 years later. They grew up playing on that deck, and as they got older, I told them the story. I wanted them to understand the importance of standing up for yourself, of documenting things, of not letting people bully you just because they have a title or position of authority. The Sunset Ridge community became a genuinely wonderful place to raise kids. The reforms implemented after Patricia's departure created a culture of cooperation rather than confrontation. The HOA focused on organizing events and maintaining common areas, and enforcement of rules became much more reasonable and proportionate. It was what an HOA should be, a way to manage shared resources and build community, not a tool for control and harassment. I never forgot the lesson about documentation. In all my subsequent home improvement projects, I kept meticulous records. Receipts, photos, timelines, everything. I never had another issue with the HOA, but if I did, I would be ready. That experience of standing in my empty garage, initially helpless and furious, before remembering I had receipts, was seared into my memory. The case occasionally came up in legal discussions about HOA authority and homeowner rights. David told me that judges in Idaho were citing it as an example of HOA overreach and the limits of covenant enforcement power. That was gratifying in its own way, knowing that my experience was contributing to the development of case law that might protect others. Looking back across the years, the whole incident seemed almost surreal. It started with such a simple thing, buying lumber for a deck project. It escalated into theft, fraud, police investigation, criminal charges, trial, and conviction. Patricia lost her position, her reputation, her home, and faced criminal penalties, all because she thought she could take my property without consequences. The deck still stands, weathered but solid, a testament to the original plan and the unexpected journey it sparked. Every board, every nail, every joint represents not just carpentry but principle, persistence, and the importance of fighting for what is right. It is more than just a place to sit and enjoy a summer evening. It is a reminder that documentation matters, that standing up to bullies works, and that the system, when engaged properly and with evidence, can deliver justice. My lumber might have been stolen, but in the end, I got it back plus interest, plus justice, plus peace of mind. And Patricia Hendricks learned an expensive lesson about the difference between authority and power, between enforcing rules and breaking laws, and about the homeowner who had receipts for every single board.